November 2004, a military hospital near Paris. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat died at the age of 75. Officially, the cause was a massive stroke, but almost no one around him believed that version. For Palestinians, he was a beloved leader and a national hero. For Israel, he was a terrorist and a sworn enemy, a man who wanted to wipe Israel off the map. Israeli intelligence had hunted him for decades. He survived countless assassination attempts, airstrikes, and sieges. Yet he died quietly in a hospital bed far from home, with strange symptoms and no clear diagnosis. More than 20 years have passed, and the mystery still hasn't faded. Was it the natural death of an aging leader, or a carefully planned poisoning, an operation covered up at the highest level? And if Mossad really did it, how did they manage to get so close to their greatest enemy in a place where no one was supposed to reach him? For Israel, Yasser Arafat was more than a politician. He was seen as a sworn enemy, a man whose early mission was to eliminate the State of Israel. For years, the PLO's message was clear. Liberating Palestine meant ending Israel's existence. Only later, under pressure, did Arafat publicly recognize Israel's right to exist, a move many in Israel never truly believed. His organization, Fatah, founded in the late 1950s, chose violence from the very beginning. Not negotiations, not diplomacy, but armed struggle. Fatah carried out attacks against Israeli civilians, targeting buses, kibbutzim, even schools, and called it resistance. But for Israel, it was nothing but terrorism. Thousands of Israelis lived under constant fear. Every new attack was a reminder that this war had no end, and its face was Yasser Arafat. Over time, he became the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and that marked the beginning of the era of international terror. Under his command, dozens of militant groups operated, hijacking planes, taking hostages, and killing civilians both inside and outside Israel. The most infamous event was the 1972 Munich Olympics, where Palestinian militants linked to the PLO murdered 11 Israeli athletes. The world was horrified, and Israel swore that those responsible would be hunted down, no matter where they hid. After Munich, Arafat became Israel's enemy number one. He moved from country to country, from Jordan to Lebanon, then to Tunisia, always finding new hideouts and new allies. But wherever he went, attacks on Israel continued under his shadow. To Israelis, he wasn't a statesman. He was the man who had directed violence against their people for years. When Arafat started talking about peace in the 1990s and signed the Oslo Accords, Israel reacted with caution. Yes, he smiled for the cameras and shook hands with world leaders. But his words didn't match his actions. Even after winning the Nobel Peace Prize, the violence didn't stop. It just changed slogans. For many Israelis, this wasn't peace. It was a tactical pause. He said one thing, but in reality remained the same man who had led the war against Israel for decades. His entourage, his organization, all of it still operated as if the conflict would never end. That's why Israel's position was clear. As long as Arafat was alive, there would be no peace. He was seen as a source of instability, a man who fueled hatred and blocked any real negotiations. Many Israeli officials and officers said it openly. If Arafat is gone, maybe there will finally be silence. That's why Israel's intelligence agencies spent years trying to eliminate him through airstrikes, covert missions, and secret plots. But every time Mossad seemed close to success, Arafat somehow escaped. Why? How did he manage to survive dozens of assassination attempts, outsmart intelligence, and slip away from death again and again? For decades, Israel hunted Yasser Arafat. From the moment he became the symbol of armed resistance, officials in Tel Aviv decided this man was too dangerous to be allowed to live freely. At first, it was simple: military raids, airstrikes, targeted attacks. But over time, Arafat learned how to disappear. He changed locations almost every night, slept in different houses, traveled without warning, and trusted no one, not even his own bodyguards. Catching him became nearly impossible. Still, Israel never gave up. There's an entire chapter in intelligence history dedicated to the failed attempts to assassinate him. These missions were top secret, assigned to one of Mossad's most elite units, Caesarea, the department responsible for targeted killings. One of the earliest plans was to intercept a plane believed to be carrying Arafat. Sometimes it was a private jet, other times even a regular passenger flight. The idea was brutal: shoot down the aircraft over deep water so no one could ever prove what really happened. But confirmation that Arafat was actually on board never came. Israel couldn't risk killing innocent civilians, and the mission was canceled. In 1982, after Israel invaded Lebanon, Defense Minister Ariel Sharon decided to act more aggressively. He saw Arafat not just as an enemy, but as a murderer responsible for Israeli deaths. Sharon created a special task force with the codename Saltfish, led by two legendary officers, Mir Dagan and Rafi Eitan, masters of covert operations who would later become icons of Israeli intelligence. Their mission was clear: track Arafat's every move in Lebanon and kill him the moment the opportunity arose. The Saltfish team spent weeks studying satellite images, intercepting communications, and gathering human intelligence. They bombed buildings where Arafat and his senior aides were believed to be hiding, but every time he escaped. Sometimes by pure luck, sometimes as if someone had warned him in advance. Later, the operation was renamed Goldfish. Israeli agents even tried to locate him through intermediaries. In one case, Mossad tracked Israeli journalist Uri Avnery, who planned to meet with Arafat, hoping to strike during the encounter. But once again, Arafat slipped away. Over time, he became almost mythical. Within Israeli intelligence circles, they joked, "Every time we think we've surrounded him, he's already in another city." In the early 2000s, when Ariel Sharon became prime minister, he publicly declared that Israel had stopped trying to kill Arafat. But 3 years later, after Israel successfully assassinated Hamas founder Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, Sharon changed his mind, saying, "This commitment no longer exists." That statement was a clear signal. The hunt for Arafat could resume at any moment. But fate decided otherwise. Despite dozens of missions, intelligence reports, and carefully crafted operations, Mossad never managed to reach Arafat. He seemed untouchable, a man who somehow always escaped death. By the early 2000s, Yasser Arafat was already an old and exhausted man. Years of isolation, constant tension, sleepless nights, and endless struggle had taken their toll. He was practically living under siege, trapped inside his headquarters, the Muqata in Ramallah. Outside were Israeli tanks, inside a handful of guards, advisors, and loyal aides. He rarely went outdoors, ate simple food, and barely trusted doctors. In the fall of 2004, something suddenly changed. On October 25th, his aides noticed he wasn't feeling well. During one meeting, he suddenly turned pale and began vomiting right at the table. His spokesman claimed it was just the flu, but those around him knew it was far more serious. He was losing strength by the hour. In the following days, doctors from Tunisia, Jordan, and Egypt came one after another to examine him. His condition worsened with each passing hour: fever, weakness, dizziness. Arafat could barely speak, stopped eating, and could hardly get out of bed. It became clear he had to be evacuated. But there was one problem: the Israeli army was blockading Ramallah. To leave, he needed permission from Tel Aviv. And to everyone's surprise, Israel allowed it. Arafat was flown by Jordanian military helicopter to Amman, and from there by French military plane to Paris. The goal was simple: to save his life. In France, he was admitted to the Percy Military Hospital in the suburb of Clamart, near Paris. Doctors examined him thoroughly, but couldn't find a clear cause. There were no viruses, no signs of poisoning, and no explanation for why his body was simply shutting down. Within days, his condition became critical. On November 3rd, doctors announced that Arafat had slipped into a coma, one that deepened with each passing day. He no longer opened his eyes, didn't respond to voices, and the doctors could only shrug helplessly. On the night of November 11th, 2004, at 3:30 a.m., UTC, Yasser Arafat was pronounced dead. He was 75 years old. French doctors listed the official cause of death as a massive hemorrhagic stroke, a severe bleeding in the brain. His medical records were kept secret for a long time. Palestinian officials said nothing, and his widow, Suha Arafat, refused an autopsy, citing Muslim tradition. Later, doctors added that he had suffered from a rare blood disorder, a clotting problem, but no one could explain how or why it developed. When his death was officially confirmed, Palestine plunged into mourning. In Ramallah and Gaza, prayers echoed from mosques, people burned tires, and thousands poured into the streets. In the refugee camps of Lebanon, 40 days of mourning were declared. Crowds wept and some swore revenge. Thus ended the life of the man who had shaped the fate of the Middle East for decades. But with his death came no closure. French doctors said it was a disease. Many of his closest allies whispered it was poison. Who told the truth and who tried to hide it? Was Arafat's death truly natural, or the result of a carefully planned operation? Almost no one believed that Yasser Arafat died of natural causes. Too many things about his death just didn't make sense. A man who only a month earlier was meeting foreign delegations suddenly fell gravely ill. Within days, his condition worsened dramatically, and 2 weeks later, he was dead. Doctors couldn't explain what had happened. Rumors began to spread almost immediately after the funeral. Some said he'd been poisoned. Others claimed he had cancer, cirrhosis, or even AIDS. Every new day brought a new theory. In September 2005, an Israeli AIDS specialist claimed that, based on Arafat's medical records, he showed symptoms of HIV. But other experts, including Patrice Mangan from the University of Lausanne and several journalists from the New York Times, called that completely false. According to them, the tests showed no signs of AIDS, cancer, or liver disease. Everything pointed to one thing. Arafat had died suddenly and inexplicably. Arafat's personal doctor, Ashraf al-Kurdi, and his close aide, Bassem Abu Sharif, were convinced he'd been poisoned. They mentioned thallium, a rare and deadly metal that can kill even in small doses. Israeli doctors, however, offered a different explanation: food poisoning or infection. Neither side could produce solid proof. For a while, the story faded away, but 10 years later, it suddenly made headlines again, when Arafat's widow, Suha Arafat, demanded a new investigation into her husband's death. In November 2013, she claimed she had undeniable evidence that her husband had been poisoned with radioactive polonium. Journalists gathered in Paris. Cameras, lights, microphones, everything was ready. Suha stepped forward with a prepared statement and said, "We are revealing a real crime, a political assassination." Her words instantly spread around the world. For her, it wasn't just a day of mourning, it was a day of return to the spotlight. Swiss experts did, in fact, find traces of polonium on Arafat's personal belongings. But their report was cautious. The radiation levels, they said, could have come from environmental contamination. Still, Suha presented it as irrefutable proof of murder. She declared, "It is scientifically proved that he didn't die a natural death." Who killed him? Why? She didn't answer those questions, but added one line that sounded like an accusation, even without names. He had many enemies. After that, Suha became a regular guest on TV shows, giving interviews beside her husband's portrait, speaking about the conspiracy against the Palestinian leader. She described how the poison might have been slipped into his coffee or tea, and claimed the assassin was likely someone from his inner circle. But in Israel, and even among Palestinians, people saw her words differently. To some, she was a grieving widow. To others, a woman who cleverly turned tragedy into personal gain. Since Arafat's death, Suha has lived between France and Malta, in luxury apartments far from the refugee camps where her husband is still revered as a martyr. When she filed a lawsuit in a French court, many saw it more as a media spectacle than a true search for justice. Even French prosecutors dismissed the theory of assassination, saying the traces of polonium were of natural environmental origin. Still, Suha kept insisting that it was an act of betrayal and a political assassination. Israeli officials called it a soap opera, while Palestinian politicians described it as a personal drama driven by ambition. With each new interview, she seemed less like a mourning widow and more like someone who had grown used to living in the spotlight. Maybe Suha truly believed what she said, or maybe she simply knew one thing. Yasser Arafat's name still brought her far more profit than the truth ever could. Thanks to Suha Arafat's persistence, the investigation into the Palestinian leader's death was reopened. The news channel Al Jazeera conducted a 9-month investigation and concluded that all the rumors about cancer, cirrhosis, and AIDS were false. Arafat had been in good health up until mid-October 2004, when he suddenly and mysteriously fell gravely ill. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Experts from the Institute of Radiation Physics at the University of Lausanne analyzed Arafat's personal belongings, his clothes, toothbrush, and even underwear. They found traces of radioactive polonium-210 in amounts tens of times higher than normal background levels. For scientists, this was a clear signal. Arafat may indeed have been poisoned with a radioactive substance. The revelation hit the world like a bombshell. A few months later, Palestinian authorities agreed to exhume his body. On November 27, 2012, 3 independent teams, French, Swiss, and Russian, arrived at Arafat's mausoleum in Ramallah. They worked under heavy security, in silence, during the night. Samples were taken from the body and the surrounding soil to be tested separately and rule out tampering. The results were astonishing. On November 6, 2013, Al Jazeera reported that Swiss scientists had found polonium levels in Arafat's ribs and pelvic bones 18 to 36 times higher than normal, even nearly 10 years after his death, when polonium's radioactivity should have decayed millions of times. The traces were still visible. The head of the Swiss team, Professor François Bouchud, said that the hypothesis of poisoning was reasonably supported. British forensic expert Dave Barclay, hired by Al Jazeera for an independent review, was more direct. In my opinion, it's absolutely clear that his illness was caused by polonium. We have the smoking gun, the thing that killed him, given to him with intent, but not everyone agreed. The French team released a different report, suggesting the polonium traces could have come from environmental sources. The Russian Commission went even further, declaring that no signs of radioactive poisoning were found and that Arafat had died of natural causes. The head of the Russian medical agency, Vladimir Uyba, stated, "The cause of death is natural." There will be no further tests. However, the French and Russian reports were never made public, while the Swiss team published theirs in full. After reviewing the other team's data, the Swiss experts concluded that all measurements indirectly supported their finding. Arafat had likely died from polonium poisoning. In 2015, French prosecutors officially closed the case, announcing that the traces of polonium and lead found were of natural environmental origin. But in Palestine, that explanation was seen as a cover-up. PLO Executive Committee member Wasil Abu Youssef said at the time, "The French report is politicized and contradicts all the facts. The president was killed by poison, and this document is just an attempt to cover up what happened in the Percy Hospital." Years have passed since then, but the mystery remains unsolved. One fact, however, is undeniable. Traces of a rare radioactive element were found on his belongings, in his body, and even in the soil around his grave, an element that cannot be obtained without state involvement. Polonium is produced only in nuclear reactors, something an ordinary person could never acquire. Could Mossad have been involved in Arafat's death? Quite possibly. Israel had hunted him for decades and had plenty of reasons to eliminate the man it saw as the greatest enemy of the Jewish state. For Israelis, Arafat wasn't just a politician. He was a symbol of terror, the architect of violence, the man responsible for countless deaths. The poisoning story sounds eerily familiar, very much in the style of Israeli intelligence, known for its precise and sophisticated operations. And yet, despite all the accusations, no investigation has ever produced solid evidence that Mossad was behind Arafat's death. Still, there are reasons to believe Israel's intelligence service may have been involved. For instance, in the book Rise and Kill First, The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations by Israeli investigative journalist Ronen Bergman, it is stated outright that Israel killed Yasser Arafat. However, the author also notes that military censorship prevents him from revealing whether he actually knows this for certain. That statement feels like a hint, a confession disguised as caution, and even if it's true, one question remains. How did they manage to get that close to Arafat? Many believed the truth about Arafat's death would never surface. But years later, hundreds of secret documents suddenly leaked online, witness testimonies, transcripts, and internal reports from the Palestinian committee created to investigate his death. Those documents had been hidden for years until someone finally uploaded them to the internet. And among them appeared the most disturbing theory of all, that Arafat was poisoned by someone who simply served him tea or coffee. The committee was led by senior Fatah official Tawfiq Tirawi. For years, he refused to release any results, insisting that the truth must be established completely. When the leak finally happened, Tirawi confirmed the documents were authentic, but said they had been kept secret to protect the integrity of the investigation. Inside were hundreds of pages, testimonies from guards, aides, doctors, and politicians. In total, more than 300 people had been questioned. Together, the documents painted a troubling picture of Arafat's final months. His relationship with his successor, Mahmoud Abbas, had become increasingly tense. The constant siege, pressure, and isolation had turned his residence, the Muqata compound in Ramallah, into a bunker filled with fear, exhaustion, and distrust. According to one testimony, Arafat once asked Abbas to help lift the Israeli blockade. Abbas reportedly replied coldly, "He who gets into trouble should know how to get out of it." By then, there was no trust left in Arafat's inner circle. But one detail repeated in the testimonies: food and drinks. Everyone remembered that, despite the siege, the Palestinian leader never refused hospitality. He was a man of the East, he loved tea, coffee, and sweets, and never wanted to offend guests, even when they seemed suspicious. His spokesman, Nabil Abu Rudaneh, put it bluntly: Arafat was poisoned by someone who served him coffee or tea. He didn't protect himself and trusted people too much. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, of gifts, food, and drinks. It all looked ordinary. Assistants, visitors, delegations, and village elders came and went. Each considered it an honor to bring something: a box of dates, a jar of honey, coffee, tea, or spices. No one checked any of it. The besieged leader didn't have a full security staff, and inspecting his meals seemed unnecessary. It was at that moment, according to the committee's version, that the poison could have entered his body, slipped into a cup served with a smile and polite wishes for his health. The commander of Arafat's presidential guard recalled one particular day. A delegation of about 300 people arrived from the village of Salfit. They brought gifts, food, and took photos with the leader. Just a few hours after their visit, Arafat began to feel unwell. First mild discomfort, then nausea, then a sudden collapse that marked the beginning of his end. No one believed it was just an illness. One of Arafat's advisors later said that he met in Paris with a French intelligence officer who told him that Arafat was in a coma and his brain was already dead. But even then, no one could explain what had really happened. French doctors insisted they had tested for every known poison and found nothing. Yet the Palestinian delegation that visited him in the hospital returned absolutely convinced that Arafat had been poisoned. And still, the theory about the tea and coffee sounded the most convincing. It was too real, too human. Not a secret operation, not a high-tech assassination, just a hand offering a cup. In the chaos of the siege, when dozens of people entered his residence every day, it would have been easy to slip a tiny dose of poison into his drink. No one would have noticed, and no one would have remembered who exactly stood beside him at that moment. This version is especially frightening because it doesn't involve an external enemy. No spy, no commando, no foreign agent. Just someone close, someone who could look him in the eye, smile, and wish him good health. That's what makes it so painful, because if Arafat really was poisoned, then it wasn't done by Mossad or any foreign intelligence service. It was done by one of his own. Dozens of theories still circle around this story. Some believe it was an internal plot ordered by his political rivals. Others think the person who served him the drink was just a pawn, someone who didn't even know the cup contained poison. And there are those convinced it was all part of an international plan, carried out through friendly hands inside his inner circle. Whatever the truth is, the man with the cup theory has become the most symbolic of all. It captures the essence of Yasser Arafat's story, a man surrounded by thousands of supporters, yet completely alone in his final days. A man who feared his enemies, but never saw the danger coming from his own table. So what do you think? How did Yasser Arafat really die? Was it a natural death, the result of age and illness? Or was he silenced by his enemies, those who had wanted him gone for years? Or maybe it was a Mossad operation, carefully planned and buried beneath layers of political secrecy? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next story. Thank you for watching.